Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs and Go. Coming up tonight, another twist and turn in the BBC scandal. It's all going on. We'll have the very latest on that. Also, speaking of the BBC, their annual report is out. The salaries of some of their top earners are eye-watering. Some people are saying, you know what, enough of all of this now. The licence fee should be scrapped. Do we need the BBC or not? And the illegal migration bill returns to the Commons today after what I would call an absolute mullering in the House of Lords. It looks very different to how it started. Will it ever pass? Also, suggestions today that we should perhaps open up our homes to welcome people crossing the channel into them in the same way that many of us did when it came to refugees from Ukraine. Are you up for it? Does that appeal to you? And over a dozen Labour MPs want to scrap Trident, our nuclear deterrent. What do you think to this? Is it essential in today's society or not? And when you were young, did you used to play outside? These days, for many kids, it's not a thing, is it? There's a campaign out today saying basically it's time to scrap a lot of cars in a lot of places so that kids can take to the streets and play. Common sense or a war on motorists? We've got it all to come, but before we get into it, let's get the news.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. A second person has come forward to make a complaint against the BBC presenter accused of paying for sexually explicit photos. The broadcaster says it spoke to a person in their early 20s. It claims they were sent a number of threatening messages by the host after they were allegedly contacted by the presenter on a dating app. The person says they were put under pressure to meet the BBC star, but never did. Well, speaking to the BBC, the second young person who was not involved in the previous payments for photos allegation says they remained scared by the power the presenter holds. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. The NATO chief has announced allies have agreed to 3 steps to bring Ukraine closer to membership. Jens Stoltenberg says 11 nations will start training Ukrainian pilots to fly F-16 jets. They have also removed the requirement for a membership action plan, making Ukraine's path to becoming a NATO country easier. Well, in addition to this, they will create a Ukraine-NATO Council for consultation and decision-making, with the first meeting being held tomorrow. Joe Biden's former Chief of Staff, Susan Platt, told GB News the US will continue to back Ukraine in its war against Russia, but NATO membership will not happen until the conflict is over.
The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining in the NATO alliance against Russia.
A Romanian people smuggler has been jailed for 12 years and 7 months for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants in 2019. 50-year-old Marius Dragici fled the country after the bodies of migrants were discovered in a container. They were being transported from Belgium to Essex by ferry. The High Court judge described Dragici as the organisers' right-hand man.
This was a conspiracy which took place over a period of time. There was a high degree of planning, organisation and sophistication, although I note that you were a latecomer to that. The offending involved a large number of illegal immigrants, and the offending involved strangers rather than a spouse or family member. This was an organised criminal enterprise run for profit.
A man has been found to have killed a 9-year-old girl as she played outside the shop where her mother was working. Lilia Valiolite died from a single stab wound to the chest in Boston last July. 23-year-old Davida Skibas was charged with her murder but deemed unfit to stand trial due to his mental health. He's expected to be given a hospital order, the only possible sentence. Mortgage rates have hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%, the highest level seen since the financial crisis of 2008. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation. Train fares could be reduced under a plan to encourage more competition on Britain's railways. New research says allowing multiple operators to run services on the same line leads to better services, newer trains and cheaper fares. Rail Partners, which represents private train companies, is calling for open access to allow more companies to compete for customers like in many other European countries. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now though, back to Michelle.
Thanks for that. I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight, alongside me Conservative Life Peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the political commentator, Joe Phillips. Good evening to both of you. And you know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us three here. It's very much about you guys at home. Get in touch with me. What is on your mind tonight? All the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email, or you can tweet me at GBNews. Coming up in the show, I'll be talking about the illegal migration bill. Of course, that has been through the House of Lords. It's had an absolute pasting, so I'm looking forward to Lord Moylan's thoughts on that. If you're sitting at home, you got a question, I don't know, you might be wondering how these things work, or any questions for the panel, you can get involved in this programme as well. Just email me your questions, and I'm sure that these guys would be delighted to answer your questions as well as mine. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Look at the enthusiasm oozing out of their pores. Right, big news, of course, by now. You'll all be familiar with what is going on at the BBC. Well, there's been a massive development today. Let's cross the live to our reporter, Mark White. He is outside New Broadcasting House. Good evening to you, Mark. Bring my viewers up to speed, if you will.
Where to begin? Well, I think it's fair to say that we have had explosive new allegations that have been made and reported by BBC News this afternoon relating to a second person who is alleging that they have had interaction with this BBC presenter, that they have been threatened by this BBC presenter with abusive and expletive-laden messages. It is claimed by BBC News that this person, a young person in their early 20s, had met the BBC presenter over a dating app, that they had come under pressure to meet up, but they never did. That interaction continued over a number of other platforms. At one point, according to BBC News, this person had threatened to expose the fact that they were interacting in this manner with this well-known BBC presenter, and at that point this person alleges that those abusive and threatening messages were sent by this presenter. Now, BBC News say that they have seen these messages for themselves, and crucially they say that they have looked at the number, compared the telephone number that the messages were sent from, and according to BBC News, they are the same number of the presenter, the BBC presenter, at the centre of these allegations that have already been reported by The Sun. We should add completely separate allegations that were first reported in The Sun on Friday. So a second set of new allegations relating to a completely different person, but very significant questions, of course, for the BBC to answer here, BBC management that is, and of course potentially for the Metropolitan Police, who are scoping out, looking at whether to launch a criminal investigation into the first set of allegations. They may well look at these second set of allegations to see whether there is any kind of criminal offence that may have been committed on this occasion as well.
And where's the presenter right now? Are they still suspended? Or anything more there?
Yes, that was confirmed by the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, today, that this presenter has been suspended. They are still suspended. BBC News have said, with regard to the second set of allegations, that they reached out directly to this presenter and to his lawyers as well, and they have heard nothing back. We should say as well, at a corporate level, senior BBC management, they have not responded to the latest set of allegations that are being reported by their own news division. It is a highly complex story, a real minefield to wade through, given that there are privacy laws, untested, of course, allegations as well, in the sense that the police haven't yet decided to launch a criminal investigation. The BBC internal investigation is actually suspended for the moment while Scotland Yard have a look at the initial allegations. And as I say, we don't even know whether they'll look at the second set of allegations.
And just a very kind of general question from me, something that I'm not understanding in this story, and perhaps it's for legal reasons. But unless I've missed it, the sex of the person, now Peoples, making these allegations, do we know that? Do we know it and we're not able to say? What's the situation there?
Well, under privacy laws and, the prospect or potential for jigsaw identification, at this stage we're just not, any of the media are not going anywhere near talking about the sex of the individuals involved, those at the centre of the allegations, either set of allegations. We're just not doing that at this stage. As I say, there is a real danger potentially of jigsaw identification that might result from that. So for the moment, as frustrating as it is, we have to wade ourselves through this very complex set of allegations. It is, according to the Director General himself when he was giving his briefing to members of the press earlier, a very difficult set of allegations that he is having to deal with, and his team here at the BBC are having to deal with, weighing up, of course, the fact that there are very serious allegations that they have to investigate, the sensitivity that they have to show to the person at the centre of the allegations, that is the initial allegations we're talking about here, and also the duty of care they have to a member of staff, as well as, of course, the wider issue of their duty to the public as a publicly funded body. It is a very, very difficult story to wade our way through, but just bear with us. I'm sure in the hours, the days ahead, we'll be able to say more on this, but we are all sort of governed by these strict privacy laws at the moment.
Got it. OK, Mark White, thank you very much for your update. Across to the panel now. So I've got to say, I am a little bit in two minds about my view on this, which is quite rare for me because normally I'm very straight down the line. So when we was discussing this yesterday, I was talking about anonymity. So, this is an allegation, nothing's been proven, and therefore the person involved deserves to be anonymous. But then there is a small part of me that kind of feels, well, if this person has done wrong, and obviously we don't know the circumstances, it can be quite hard to prove guilt. But then if there's a series of people that this person may have acted inappropriately with, then that is going to help facilitate an investigation. So then part of me sits there and thinks, should the person be named?
Well, it's a very difficult area to get into, and I don't want to because I'm not a lawyer, and I don't want to say anything on air.
No, but I want your view.
I think on the whole, people should have a degree of anonymity. when they're charged with an offence, partly because nowadays the criminal justice system is so slow. You can wait years to be charged and years again to get a trial, and you have that hanging over you all the time, and I think that's simply unfair. And to have your name out there as well at the same time can completely blight your life for a number of years now. I wouldn't feel so strongly about it if people were charged and brought to trial more quickly, but that seems to have fallen apart.
And there's no suggestion at the moment that anybody's going to be charged with anything. I think, the reason that we have had this change to privacy laws is because of the terrible, terrible way that Cliff Richard was treated.
Indeed.
And that was awful. And Cliff Richard, Paul Gambaccini, if you think back as well to the slurs against Lord Britton, Lord Bramall, facilitated to a large extent by the police, it has to be said, in giving details to journalists. So I think, actually, although it is an extremely complicated, as Mark said, it is a minefield, but he walked through that minefield very well without giving anything away.
Well, if I was one of the fellow presenters, colleagues of this person, I mean, they're all coming out. It's like... I don't know if anyone remembers that song, that Shaggy It Wasn't Me song. At this rate, they're all going to have to do like a cover version of that. They're all coming out and say, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. Let's speak about the licence fee, if we can, because some of the salaries of some of these BBC stars were published today. Some eye-watering sums there. I'll get it up on my screen if I can. Let's have a look. See what we've got going on. So, highest paid BBC presenters, Gary Lineker, 1.3 million. Smackaroonies, Zoe Ball, just shy of 1,984,000. Hugh Edwards, he's 439,000. Ken Bruce, nearly 400,000. Fiona Bruce, nearly 400,000. Many people look at this and say, do you know what? Why are we, taxpayers, having to fund these salaries and, more broadly, the BBC? Do you support this kind of whole licence fee funded need for a broadcaster like this?
Yeah, I think the BBC is being very stubborn and slow in not facing up to the fact that the licence fee is an anachronism in a digital age, and that you can't... Basically, it was a tax on television receivers, on televisions themselves. That's really what it was. You had a television, you had to pay a tax on it, and that went to the BBC. Nowadays, there are so many different channels, so many different modes of getting hold of things, and the BBC has to go around extending it so that on your computer, if you look at your computer on BBC News, it comes up and asks you to confirm you've paid the licence fee. Nobody knows whether you have. They can't enforce it. It's an anachronism, and the BBC itself.
But I thought they could enforce it. I thought you could go to prison for not paying this.
You can if you have a television, but I don't know how they do it if you're watching your computer.
Well, I used to see. Do they still have those big vans?
I mean, I have a television. I want to say I have a television licence.
Well, that's a very reassuring.
Very good.
If I watch the BBC and I click the button saying I've got a licence, I have got one.
But it's not just it's not just about the BBC. It's to watch live broadcasts as well.
And it's to watch everything. You're right. And I think the BBC itself should be thinking imaginatively about how they're going to fund themselves, how they're going to get the public to contribute to funding them in the future, and come forward with a more imaginative idea.
Joe?
Well, I think it's really important that we have a broadcaster that is free of commercial pressures. I think it's incredibly important that we have a news service that is recognised around the world. It is one of the sort of soft diplomacy tools in our arsenal that people trust the BBC News. BBC World Service is hugely important to many, many people. BBC monitoring services, BBC foreign language services are vital to people around the world. I think there are some things that the BBC does absolutely brilliantly, and I think, when we went into lockdown, the stuff that they were producing for schools, for education, pretty much overnight was absolutely brilliant. But there's other stuff that they do.
But is that really their job? I mean, do we
they're a
state
if you argue that they're paid for by the taxpayer, then they should be providing those services. So yes, I think it is their job, and that they've got those tools at their disposal. I think there are things that they do that are purely commercial. That shouldn't be part of the licence fee, and I think it's very difficult, as Daniel says. I mean, things moved on. down. Lots of people watch the BBC not when it's on the telly, on YouTube or something.
Well, there you go. Let me know your thoughts. A bold statement there from Joe saying that people trust the BBC and BBC News and all the rest of it and that it's impartial. I wonder your thoughts.
Particularly abroad.
Particularly that abroad. Yeah, but then I can imagine people here saying, well, why am I paying for some random abroad to have this trusted, impartial broadcaster? I don't know. I'll throw it open to you at home.
Oh,
what
well.
do you make to it? And I'll tell you what, if someone was making allegations against me that I hadn't done, never mind other people having to name me, I'd be straight out there telling you that I was not guilty and all the rest of it. That's perhaps maybe just me. Lots to get into with you guys tonight. Do you think we need nuclear deterrence tridents in this country? And oh, goodness me, the migration bill, illegal migration bill, it's at a battering in the House of Lords. Will this ever get over the line? And do you think the House of Lords are a help or a hindrance when it comes to this issue? Your thoughts? Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got the Tory peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the political commentator, Joe Phillips. Paul says he's got a sense in this country. He feels like the privacy laws seem to be for the rich and the famous. Many people will refer to so-called things like super injunctions and all the rest of it. He's saying that if you're just a man on the street, you perhaps wouldn't have those levels of protection. Well, you probably would have them, but affording them with all the top lawyers perhaps would be a different thing, wouldn't isn't it? A few people of you guys saying that you don't trust the BBC. You have a completely different view to Joe Phillips on that topic. But let's talk about one of the big topics of the day, shall we? Illegal migration. Now, ministers are being forced to change the illegal migration bill. Get this, everyone. It had 20 defeats in the House of Lords. I find this quite interesting. You are a sitting member of the Lords. You did indeed vote on this bill. It's been doing a couple of backwards and forwards, hasn't it? It's back in the Commons today. I would say that some of these amendments that are being pushed through via the Lords, they really do change things, I would argue, for the worse. So one of the big ones, Daniel, is in terms of applying this bill retrospectively. So that now has been kicked to the curb. So now this bill will only affect people from whatever the date of this bill being put into action. I think that's a huge change. Do you support that?
No, I don't support it. And I voted with the government on all 20 of the amendments over 2 days of voting. And I think the bill should go through. Now, it's gone back to the Commons today. The government has accepted, I think, 5 of the amendments. And so the 15 that are outstanding, I may have got that slightly wrong, but roughly 15 of them are being voted on. I expect, I don't know what's been going on. They started voting when I left the Palace of Westminster around that time. But I imagine the government will win those votes, and that means it'll come back tomorrow to the House of Lords, and around 6 o'clock we will start debating it again. And it's up to the House of Lords. They can say, yes, we've listened, we've made our point to the Commons, they don't agree with us, we're going to give way. But I don't expect that. I think they will carry on, they'll put the amendments down again, or very similar amendments down again, on these outstanding points, of roughly 15 outstanding points. We'll be there all night, late tomorrow voting, and it will then go back to the Commons again. And we've got time set aside early next week for it to come back to us again, because the bill has to be agreed between the two houses. And at some point, the Lords are going to have to give way because, you know, we are an unelected chamber, and if the Commons is insistent on this, we should give way. But they really don't want to.
Is there a cap to this? To help viewers understand that might not be familiar with all of the processes. So is there a cap to how many times you can play it backwards and forwards?
We call it ping pong. We do call it ping pong.
So is there a cap? So, I mean, you can't carry on indefinitely.
There is no cap, and there is somebody with a good memory who remembers that on at least one bill sometime in the last 20 years, it went backwards and forwards 7 times. Right. That would be an extreme case.
But the timing is everything, isn't it, Daniel? Because we're coming up to recess.
Yeah. Well, there won't be a recess. They'll find more days.
Just keep going.
They'll find more days, and they'll sit later and later and later. But it's an interesting question, because as it comes back more and more, there'll be those peers who say, perhaps on the crossbenches and others, who'll say, we've got to give, in the end, we've got to give way to the elected House. They know that the House of Lords can't prevail ultimately against the House of Commons if the Commons is determined. There's also a very interesting question for Labour, because if this is what the House of Lords does to government legislation, that's not a good precedent for Labour to set if they think, rightly or wrongly, they're going to be the government in the quite near future, so in the not too distant future. So I think there'll come a point when the House of Lords will give way and let the government have its way on this.
But it's quite right that the Lords, the second chamber, has gone through as much as it can, line by line, and has, you know, wanted amendments. I mean, that's what it's there for, is to refine, to question.
Depends. It is absolutely right that the Lords should go through it line by line, because the Commons doesn't do that anymore. No. And the Lords does, and
but
it really does.
But do you honestly, so if I quizzed you on lines, would you honestly have read this all line by line?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they take it seriously.
We really do. And not on every bill. I can't do every bill that comes forward. I pick the bills I do, but we really do know them, and we're going through them in a lot of detail. And the debates go on. We're not time limited on debates, so we can go on until we feel we've got it thoroughly done. But amendments that genuinely improve the bill and make it work better are one thing. Amendments that are designed to wreck it and prevent it from working at all is something the Lords should be very, very careful about doing. And in this, and normally doesn't try to wreck a bill, but in this case, I think that's what some have been trying to do.
Well, it's reckoned it's Amendment 37. I'll give you an example. This is one of the amendments put forward in the laws. Prevent the removal of LGBT people to certain countries. Well, to me, this whole LGBT thing is a gaping opportunity for abuse. Because, of course, if someone wants to come and live in this country and all the rest of it, to just say, well, do you know what, I'm gay and I'm going to be persecuted in my home country, well, what are you going to do as an asylum checker? You're not going to follow them to the bedroom.
Removal to a third country, and that's specifically about Rwanda.
Yes, but then
no, it's
what
not
I'm saying
specifically
to you...
about Rwanda.
Oh, where's it about?
Well, it's about people, say, who came here from Iran and said that they didn't want to be sent back home. It isn't specifically about Rwanda.
OK. I thought it was the removal.
In fact, the bill never refers
country.
to Rwanda. The bill has no reference
I mean,
to Rwanda.
you know, the whole thing is so difficult, and we've talked about it so many times on this programme and, you know, for months and months and months. The problem is that immigration, illegal migration, asylum seekers all get bundled up into the same thing. And because the rhetoric that's been used by people, including prime ministers and some to the right
what
of
rhetoric?
the rhetoric that, you know, basically all asylum seekers should be just sent home, the fact that you have, you know, painting over Mickey Mouse cartoons in a children's...
No, first of all, nobody's not saying, and nobody's saying that all asylum seekers should be sent home. The bill doesn't say that. What the bill says is that people who've arrived illegally in this country should be taken to a safe country where they can pursue their asylum claim.
It would be helpful if we dealt with the backlog. I mean, people are waiting.
It might be helpful if we dealt with the backlog, but the question is not the backlog. Those people are here. The question is how to break the business model of these huge travel agencies, illegal
absolutely.
travel agencies that are making money out of human misery. And these people, these poor people, are actually paying money to do it.
No.
And if they know that landing at Dover is not going to keep them here, but they'll be going somewhere else, they might stop paying that money.
Let me put some different rhetoric your way then, because Policy Exchange think tank, they've come out with a new suggestion
I saw that.
today. Brandon Lewis, he's backed it as well. What they're saying is that why don't you extend things like the Ukraine scheme and encourage people or allow people, if that's what they want to do, to put some of these people, these migrants, into their homes. Would you do that?
If I had space, yes, I would. And I think,
Would you really? So you're telling me that someone that gets onto a dinghy where you don't know who they are,
but Michelle, this is where it all gets muddled. Those are people who are going to be held in detention or held in a centre before anything happens to them. They're not going to come in. My argument about the backlog is that there are people who've been waiting up to 3 years. There are something like, I think it's about 160,000 people.
So would you take one of these people out of the backlog queue out of the hotel and put them into your house?
No, and that's not what they're suggesting. What they're saying is
why wouldn't you?
Because you need to know a bit more about them. But if you're processing people more quickly, the Ukrainian, safe passage, the same for the Hong Kong people who came over here. We've done it before. We can do it when it suits us. But if they got through the backlog, you would have more people who are either, yes, you can stay, you can start, living your life, you can go and stay with a family, whatever, and you're not entitled to stay, so you need to go. But all the time you've got these people clogging it up, that creates worse feelings.
It's an complete irrelevance to the issue in hand.
What do you make of it all? And I'm interested in your view as well, particularly on that question that I was asking. Do you think the House of Lords are a help when it comes to matters like this, or a hindrance? I'm really interested to see what you think to it. Nuclear weapons, Trident, do you think we need them in this country? Yes or no?
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Further heavy showers over the next few days, quite breezy as well, temperatures around average for the time of year. So we look at the bigger picture. Low pressure is in charge of our weather at the moment, bringing in those showers. Pushes just a little further east over the next few days, introducing a northwesterly flow. So quite chilly around some northwestern coasts of the UK. To end Tuesday, showers fade for a time across parts of England and Wales, but continue across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Through the night, some of these heavy at times, then pushing back into Northern England, North Wales by the end of the night. Temperatures for all in double figures, 14 or 15 Celsius as minimums in towns and cities, a little lower in the countryside. The best of the sunshine first thing will be across southeastern parts of the UK. Further north and west, it's quite cloudy. There'll be some showery rain, and this slowly pushes south and eastwards through the day. Showers turning heavy at times by the afternoon. The odd rumble of thunder is possible, particularly across Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland too. We could see some localised disruption, and temperatures on the cool side, 17 to 19 across the north of the UK, 20 to 23, perhaps 24 across the far southeast of England. Into Thursday, a bright start to the morning. There will be some sunny spells around too, but there's scattered showers for many, perhaps less frequent and less heavy compared to recent days, still highs around 23 or 24.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got a Conservative Life Peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the political commentator, Joe Phillips. Who's this? Laurie says, Michelle, why does everyone always answer that asylum seeker question the same way? When you say, would you put a migrant into your house, most people just say, yes, if we had the room. If you had the room, would you take someone in?
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't take a single man.
Would you take a migrant in?
No.
Why not?
I don't want other people living in my home.
Yeah, I've got to say, if I was asked that question, I absolutely categorically would not, under any circumstances, have any random stranger staying in my house, because for me, the priority is the safety and well-being of my family. However, each to their own, and if you would, maybe you did with the Ukraine scheme, I don't know, you get in touch and you let me know. Now, let's talk Trident, shall we? Because, get this, everybody, more than a dozen members of Keir Starmer's top team have called for Britain to scrap Trident. Given the situation that we're in at the moment, when it comes to peace around the world, or lack of in some cases, I actually think that having Trident as a deterrent is, you know, in an ideal world you wouldn't need it, but in the world that we live in, I think we do need it. Do you?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Let's hope it remains a deterrent and is never, ever used. I mean, I think it's fair to point out that these people signed this early day motion in the House of Commons in 2021. Quite why it's come into the Daily Mail today, I don't know. I can only assume because it's some sort of a bit of mischief making. But they were signing a thing called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which Britain doesn't support. NATO doesn't support, so I'm not entirely sure why that's appeared in the Mail. But I agree with you, Michelle. Yes,
do you think we need Trident?
I think we do need Trident, and I think you can't trust Labour on defence. I think it's as simple as that. We don't know what... Labour has been very quiet about their defence policies. We don't know what they do, and we don't know whether they would keep the nuclear deterrent and renew the nuclear deterrent, which is, of course, what is necessary, because Trident itself is getting a little bit old. And that will be a big, expensive item. So I think they need to be clear. I'm not holding these guys to what they said 2 years ago. They've had the chance to deny it. They could have denied it and said, our thinking has changed. They haven't said that, as far as I know. But I just don't trust the Labour Party generally. Whatever they said 2 years ago, I wouldn't trust them today.
In the interests of balance, let me read out what a Labour spokesperson said, that its support for nuclear deterrence was total, adding it provides protection to our NATO allies as well as the UK. Under Keir Starmer, Labour's support for NATO, our nuclear deterrent, the UN and our armed forces is unshakable.
But he's reversed every pledge he's made.
That may be the case. I just think in the interest of balance, it is only fair, given that we're in well, we are in, coming up to some by-elections, so some balance would be quite good. I find it interesting as well that you say you can't trust Labour on defence, because many people watching this at home will push back and say, well, hang on a second, because it's the Tories that, for example, have diminished a lot of the armed forces. There was a report out the other day in terms of the standard of equipment that we've got, for example, in the army, the number of the personnel that we've got in the army, and that's happened. The diminishing of that's happened on a Tory watch, not a Labour one.
Yeah, there's a real question going on, which again we haven't heard Labour engage with, about what sort of armed forces you need for the future and how much of it is actually heavy weaponry and men on the ground, boots, I shouldn't say men and women on the ground. How much of it is that, and how much of it is a more modern way of fighting? Now, all of that thinking that was going on has been reversed in a way by what's been going on in Ukraine, because Ukraine has been a war which has been all about heavy weapons. And so there's a lot of thinking going on about this and what the size and shape of the armed forces should be. I think they probably have been cut back too much. I think the government should spend more on defence. But we have a lot of competing pressures as well. There are other things we should spend money on. We can't spend money on everything.
You mentioned NATO. No, you can't spend the money on everything, by the way, but defence, for me, would be pretty right up there.
Defence is pretty high up for me.
Top priority spending, if you ask me. NATO, you mentioned NATO.
I keep thinking you're trying to turn me off with that thing.
No, this is not a random remote control. This is a very high-tech piece of equipment. I can't tell you what it is, because sometimes we have to keep secret.
If I explode, we'll know why.
I'm waving it energetically at Joe. NATO, of course, Lithuania.
Yeah.
We're just seeing Rishi Sunak, or I think we can just see Rishi Sunak. He's just arrived for that talk. When you hear about NATO, of course, you've got conversations at the moment about whether or not Ukraine should be admitted. Zelensky, he's not happy at the moment. He says that they should be allowed in. There should be a better and quicker and more effective timetable to allow that, and etc. Where do you stand?
Well, I can understand where President Zelensky's coming from, and I'm sure he's very impatient. He wants to do it, but the conversation started. Actually, it was sort of extended an invitation by George Bush in 2008, but NATO is very clear. It expects a certain standard of behaviour of the countries that it admits to that very exclusive club, and that is about the governance in its own country. And there were big questions about the levels of corruption in Ukraine. Now, what has come up today, actually in the last half hour, is that the NATO Secretary-General, the outgoing Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, has come up with something that looks like a reasonable compromise, which gives a sort of a one-step, as opposed to a two-step, accession for Ukraine, but with no date on it. In other words, we're going to keep supporting you, we are going to support you, with whatever you need, whether it's weaponry or diplomatic efforts or whatever. But you can't.
What's the point in NATO then?
Because
if you're going to go to what you're saying is we're going to do. NATO say, oh yeah, we're going to do all this support for Ukraine. But if Ukraine is not a member and you're saying, oh, NATO's going to give it all this support, what is the value in being a member then? If whenever someone in conflicts outside of NATO is going to get, to quote you, all the support.
Because if Ukraine had been a member of NATO and Russia had still invaded Ukraine, we would be at war with Russia, because the whole point of NATO is that everybody supports each member.
Well, you mean, are you on about the Article 5, which is essentially the attack on one is attack on all, you'd have boots on the ground.
Yeah.
But then that brings in Moylan's point, Daniel's point, which is about actually what does conflict look like? Because whilst we're not at war, boots on the ground with Russia, there's no denying that we are one of the forefront players when it comes to financial assistance to Ukraine, weaponry, arms, all of those kind of things to Ukraine as it stands at the moment.
We are, and thankfully Boris took a lead in that and led the world on it, led Europe. I think the question of Ukraine joining and what's been said today, I think Ukraine will be bitterly disappointed by what's been said today, because although Joe tries to sort of big it up as something, in fact, it isn't very much. They're going to carry on training them they're going to train them on aeroplanes. They're going to have a council. A council is going to meet between... They've already got a commission. They're just changing the name from commission to council. I think they're going to be very bitterly disappointed by what's been decided today. I personally believe you can't admit Ukraine to NATO while a war is going on. But I certainly think now that whatever you would have thought before this war, if Ukraine succeeds in getting the Russians out, which I greatly hope they do, then Ukraine needs to join NATO.
Well, there you go. What's your thoughts on that? And of course, you will have just heard Lord Moylan there saying, thankfully, Boris Johnson led the way. There'll be some people, perhaps, that say, is it our job to lead the way in this conflict? Opinions might be divided on that one. But when it comes to Ukraine in NATO, do you agree that that is the next step and the right next step or not? Let me ask you this as well. When you were young, let's get all misty-eyed. Did you used to be able to play outside safely? Well, what changed? Because many now cannot do that. There's a campaign saying that traffic curbs need to be put in place now to protect kids so that they can play outside. Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the Tory Life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the political commentator, Joe Phillips. We were talking about Trident. Ian says we must keep Trident because it gives us a seat at the top table. I find this conversation about international influence absolutely fascinating. Why do we need to be so desperate on these top tables? What do we get from that? Is it a benefit or a bit of a hindrance? Your thoughts on that? Bernard saying, what a state the world must be in when Turkey seems to have a lot of say when it comes to what does and doesn't go on in NATO. Lots of support for Trident. Many of you saying that we do not want to get rid of that. We need the ultimate deterrent in this country. On the House of Lords, Keith says the House of Lords should be disbanded immediately. They cost too much money every day for doing nothing. That's what Keith says. But what would you replace them with? Because you've got to have some form of second chamber. So how would you make it any better? What's wrong with the House of Lords, asked Jim. Well, I've got to be honest, we only got till 7 o'clock, so I'll have to save that question for a different day, Jim. Let's talk Charles, safety and play, shall we? When we were all young, I suspect we used to go out and about, be free to roam and all the rest of it, and life is different for youngsters these days. Now, there's a campaign, a charity that wants us basically to look at traffic and reducing traffic on roads, and they're saying that will allow more people, more kids to be out and about playing on streets and roads safely. What do you make to it?
Well, I think it's just an anti-traffic thing, basically. Roads are there for the part of our transport infrastructure.
And this is your background, just for context to the viewers, isn't it? This is your bag, you know about this.
Yeah, our transport infrastructure is fundamentally there to let people get from A to B and move around, and that includes moving around by motor vehicle, deliveries, as well as personal cars and so on. So I see this as essentially an anti-traffic move. What stops people, children, going out today is not the roads, it's the parents. And when I was young, I'm very ancient, but when I was young, we used to go on the bus to school starting at about the age of 7. Our parents, I mean, my mother, the first time she let us go on the bus on her own, she was breaking her heart as I got on that bus on my own about the age of 7 or something like that. But she knew she had to do it because that's what we did. And we were out and we learned things. We learned how not to get into danger and risk and not to walk in front of buses, not walk in front of cars. There are some places that have play streets, that's absolutely fine. But on the whole, children should be outdoors. They should have a chance to play outdoors. We have plenty of parks. We have lots of people who have access to parks. And in all new developments, we try to include green space. The government has a policy of making sure people are no more than 15 minutes walk from green space or blue space, as they say, for lakes and things like that and ponds. And that's what we should be focusing on, not trying to bugger up everybody's life who's trying to get around, go to work, do deliveries and things like that, on this false pretext of children playing in streets.
I think I'm guessing that what you're talking about is very much London, because...
About cities.
Or cities, yes, OK, so cities.
This is a city story.
Well,
it doesn't have to be about London.
No.
In the countryside, it might be slightly different because the roads
that was the point I was trying to get to, that in suburban areas, you know, in fact, Daniel and I were having this argument before we came in. I think there are more cars, not necessarily in London, but I think, you know, more families, more households have more than one car. Cars are big. Cars are quite heavy and they are extremely dangerous, and there are something like 12,000 children die each year from road accidents.
That's not true. There are 5,000 killed and seriously injured, 5,000 road deaths in the whole country in a year, and that includes that.
Well, not according to the figures that are in this.
Yeah, well, I've got figures here. It says in 2021, 11,580 children under 15 were killed or injured on roads in the UK. The annual average over the last 5 years is 13,503.
So, but, you know, the short answer is we've got an obesity crisis. Kids don't get enough exercise. We need to encourage them, and we do need to...
So what's your solution, then?
We don't have an obesity crisis either. That's another made-up story.
OK, all right. Well, let's not talk about made-up stories.
We're going to be out of time in a minute.
Right, yes. get rid of some cars, let kids have space to play.
Right, so what do you mean get rid of cars? What are you gonna do?
You know, have some more restrictions on roads so that there are areas where cars can't go. If you're building a new housing estate, have a parking area where people could manage to walk from that parking area, which is what you used to have in terrace streets, back to their house, and so the kids can play on the streets. Support, lots of councils do safe streets and play street schemes, but it's only for one day a year. I think the fear of traffic, certainly outside of cities, is a really big fear for parents.
What about 10-foots? I used to spend my life playing in the 10-foots. Why don't they make those a thing on all housing estates? Joe says, when I was a child, places like Liverpool or Birkenhead had streets where traffic was banned between certain hours. We called them play streets. Maybe that is what we need to do. Cheryl says, I had a great free childhood running around everywhere. I feel sorry for the children today. They're constantly under our adult supervision. She says, it's that which holds it back. Is it clingy parents? Is that what's going on? Right, look at this. I will, again, another one, Colin, he's saying that it's parents mollycoddling their kids. It's not the traffic, apparently. Yes, when I was young, playing fields, Mark's saying that playing fields keep getting built on. Anyway, Joe, that is all I've got time for. Lord Moylan, that's all I've got time for. Thank you very much for your contribution. And thank you as well at home for getting involved in the conversation. Do not go anywhere. You've got Nigel Farage up next, but I will see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Further heavy showers over the next few days, quite breezy as well, temperatures around average for the time of year. So we look at the bigger picture. Low pressure is in charge of our weather at the moment, bringing in those showers. Pushes just a little further east over the next few days, introducing a northwesterly flow. So quite chilly around some northwestern coasts of the UK. To end Tuesday, showers fade for a time across parts of England and Wales, but continue across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Through the night, some of these heavy at times, then pushing back into Northern England and North Wales by the end of the night. Temperatures for all in double figures, 14 or 15 Celsius as minimums in towns and cities, a little lower in the countryside. So the best of the sunshine first thing will be across southeastern parts of the UK. Further north and west, it's quite